Before the horror, before the camps, before the silence of death echoed through the barbed wire, there was Vienna. It was the 1920s, a city vibrating with intellectual life, where science, philosophy, and the arts collided in smoky cafes and lecture halls. Among the crowd of thinkers and dreamers, a young medical student named Viktor Frankl stood quietly, notebook in hand, listening, observing. He wasn't just another doctor in training. Frankl was obsessed with a question most avoided. Why do people live? At just 16, he wrote to Sigmund Freud. By 19, he was already publishing papers on existential questions. But while others explored the mechanics of the mind, Frankl wanted to go deeper, into the soul, into meaning. He saw something others didn't. In the rising tide of despair after World War I, suicide rates among the youth in Vienna were surging. Frankl volunteered in clinics and schools, counseling those who saw no reason to go on. His approach was simple, yet revolutionary. He listened, not for symptoms, but for stories, not for pathology, but for purpose. That's when the seed of logotherapy was planted, the belief that man's primary drive is not pleasure, not power, but meaning. And yet, even he couldn't imagine the brutal test that life was preparing for him, one that would push his philosophy beyond theory into the fire of lived experience.
By the late 1930s, the world outside Frankl's clinic was changing, fast and darkly. Austria had been annexed by Nazi Germany. The streets of Vienna, once filled with music and philosophy, now echoed with boots and fear. As a Jewish psychiatrist, Frankl faced choices that no man should ever be forced to make. He had just received a visa to immigrate to America, a chance to escape, to survive. But there was a catch. The visa did not include his parents. If he left, they would be alone, vulnerable. So he waited. On the wall of his family's home hung a fragment of stone from a destroyed synagogue, engraved with one line from the Ten Commandments: "Honor thy father and thy mother." That inscription became his answer. He would stay. And the cost of that choice came swiftly. In September of 1942, Frankl, along with his wife Tilly, his parents, and his brother, were deported to Theresienstadt, a ghetto and concentration camp disguised by the Nazis as a model settlement. It was neither a settlement nor a place for life. What awaited them behind the gates was starvation, disease, and the slow, deliberate erosion of human dignity. But even there, Frankl found work and meaning. He volunteered as a doctor, treating fellow prisoners, not with medicine, there was none, but with words and with presence. Still, the worst was yet to come.
It was a gray morning when the train stopped. Crammed into cattle cars for days, with no food, no water, and barely enough air to breathe, the prisoners had long lost track of time. But when the doors slid open, a name passed from mouth to mouth like a ghost: Auschwitz. Frankl stepped out into a nightmare that had learned to wear the mask of order. Uniforms, barked commands, numbers, men to the left, women to the right. No explanation, no time for goodbyes. That was the last time he saw his wife, Tilly. He was stripped of everything, not just his clothes, but his name, his profession, his identity. His manuscript, the one he had hidden inside his coat, the book he had spent years writing, was taken and burned. From that moment forward, he was not Viktor Frankl. He was number 119104. But even in that moment of utter dehumanization, something stirred inside him, a quiet defiance. He could not control his surroundings, but he could choose his response. "Everything can be taken from a man," he would later write, "but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." In Auschwitz, death was routine, hope was forbidden. But in Frankl's mind, a spark remained, the idea that even here, especially here, meaning still mattered.
Each day in the camp was an experiment in endurance, not just of the body, but of the soul. The mornings began in darkness, with the blare of a whistle and the shouts of guards. Prisoners stumbled into formation for roll call, sometimes for hours, in sub-zero temperatures. Frostbite wasn't a risk, it was a guarantee. Food was not nourishment, but survival math. A crust of bread, a watery ladle of soup, shared among men whose ribs pressed against skin. Disease spread faster than rumors. Typhus, tuberculosis, dysentery. And yet, amid this mechanized cruelty, Frankl watched, not only others, but himself. Why did some survive while others gave up? He began to see a pattern. Those who had something to live for, even if it was just the hope of seeing a loved one again, or finishing a book, or believing their pain had meaning, endured longer. They walked differently, spoke differently, thought differently. Frankl started whispering encouragement to those near him, reminding them of memories, of future plans, of who they were before this place. He asked not, "What can I expect from life?" but "What does life expect from me, even now?" It was dangerous. Hope could be seen as resistance, but he risked it anyway, because he had made a choice. He would not let the camp decide who he was. He was still a doctor, still a husband, still a man of meaning. And in that silent decision, he began to rebuild the foundation of what it meant to be human.
Loss in the camps was not sudden, it was silent. There were no farewells, no mourning, no graves. People simply vanished, transported, selected, burned. Frankl learned of his father's death not from an announcement, but from a whisper. His father had died of starvation and exhaustion in Therienstadt, alone. No family, no final words. Frankl carried that knowledge quietly, folding the grief into his daily survival like an extra weight in his coat. Invisible, but crushing. But even heavier was the not knowing. What had happened to Tilly? He clung to the hope that she was still alive in another camp, that maybe, somehow, they would meet again. He began to imagine her, vividly, as he marched or stood in roll call. Her smile, her voice, her presence. In those moments, she became his reason. Later he would write, "Love goes very far, beyond the physical person of the beloved. It finds its deepest meaning in his spiritual being, his inner self." Frankl realized something that shocked even him, that even in suffering, love could endure, untouched by death or distance, and that love, not survival, was the ultimate affirmation of life. When the truth finally came that Tilly had died in Bergen-Belsen, he did not collapse. He had already said goodbye 1,000 times in his heart, and he had already chosen to live with the meaning she gave him. It was not acceptance, it was transcendence. At some point, survival becomes more than just not dying. It becomes a decision to live for something beyond the self. For Frankl, that something was helping others find meaning, even in a place designed to erase it. He began speaking quietly with fellow prisoners during rare moments of rest. He would ask them questions no one else dared to ask in such a place. What gives you the strength to wake up tomorrow? What does your pain mean to you? Who is waiting for you out there? Most prisoners had long stopped asking such questions, but when Frankl posed them, something stirred, a flicker of memory, a purpose rekindled. One man remembered his daughter. Another recalled a book he had begun before the war. A third simply wanted to survive to tell the world what he saw. These weren't small things, they were lifelines. Frankl became known, quietly, as someone who gave strength not through food or power, but through words. He told them, if you have a why, you can endure any how. They listened. Not always, not everyone, but enough. Even as he labored with bleeding hands, even as his own body decayed, Frankl felt something extraordinary. That meaning was not destroyed by suffering, but often discovered through it. The camp was still hell, but now he had a mission. And that mission made him freer than many of the guards who beat him.
On April 27, 1945, the gates opened. There were no celebrations, no cheers. The liberation came quietly, as if the world itself had forgotten them. Frankl stepped out of the camp not as the man he once was, but as someone who had seen the edge of human suffering and chosen, somehow, to return. He weighed less than 100 pounds. His hands trembled. His body was free, but his soul still walked among the dead. He returned to Vienna. The city had survived, but his world had not. His parents were gone. His brother was gone. His wife was gone. The apartment was empty. The streets were unfamiliar. Even the language felt colder. For days he wandered, not with purpose, but with disbelief. He would later write, quote, "Now that I was free, there was hardly anything I felt more painful than this freedom," unquote. But then something happened. He began to write furiously, as if the truths he had witnessed could not stay silent. In just 9 days, he drafted the manuscript that would become his most powerful work, Man's Search for Meaning. It wasn't a book about death, it was about survival, about choice, about how even in the most grotesque suffering, man could retain his inner freedom. He didn't write to be famous, he wrote because he had to, because the world needed to know that meaning is not something we wait to find, it's something we choose to create. And through that choice, even pain can become purpose. In the years that followed, Viktor Frankl became a voice the world didn't know it needed. He lectured on 5 continents, published over 30 books, but none captured hearts like Man's Search for Meaning, a slim volume that would sell over 16 million copies and be translated into more than 50 languages. Still, Frankl never sought to be a guru. He remained a clinician, a teacher, a man who believed that pain could be dignified if it had purpose. His message was simple, but not easy. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. He taught that even when everything is taken, your health, your freedom, your future, there remains one final power: to choose your attitude, not as optimism, but as defiance, not as fantasy, but as truth. Frankl died in 1997 at the age of 92, decades beyond the death the Nazis had prepared for him. But his words live on, especially in times when the world feels adrift. In a culture obsessed with comfort, his story reminds us that the deepest fulfillment doesn't come from avoiding suffering, but from transforming it. You are not your circumstances. You are not your wounds. You are the meaning you give to them. And that is the last of the human freedoms. If this story moved you, If it reminded you of your own strength or of someone who needs to hear it, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Share in the comments what gives your life meaning. Send it to someone going through a dark time. And subscribe to Frankl's Insight for more true stories that restore your faith in the human spirit. Because meaning isn't just something we find, it's something we create. Together.